All right, welcome back to the My Church Internet broadcast. This is Pastor Sonny coming to you from Fort Worth, Texas, and I'm going to thank you for joining me. We've been studying God's plan and purpose for Israel, and this is session 4. And we left off with talking about the two titles that Satan has, and they are very similar. And one of them being the prince of this world, and the other one being, well, the prince of this world, which refers to his position as the possessor of this world, and his other title, the prince of the power of the air. And the last title has to do with control he exercises in heavenly places, as the principalities in heavenly places joined him in his rebellion against God. Now, it is the things pertaining to this last title that explains why God determined to bring about the dispensation of Gentile grace and kept it a secret from the beginning. Now, as we have covered in other studies, it is through the one new man that God has provided for the repossession of the heavenly places. Now, under consideration in this study is the manner in which God is dealing with Satan as the prince of this world. That used to be Adam's title as the king and monarch of all the earth. But he lost that position to Satan when he cooperated with the plan of evil by taking of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. We then see Satan's course for this world unfolding in Genesis chapter 4 through chapter 11. And it briefly appears as though God has given up on using mankind to repossess the world. God was still going to use man to accomplish his plan. And he did this through He did this through Abram, as he called him away from his country and family and promised to make from Abram a great nation, and through him all the world would be blessed. Now we're going to expand our understanding of the great nation concept by going to the book of Daniel. Here we're going to see what this encompasses for the nation with regard to the dominion that they are to have over the entire world. It is through Israel that God's ways are to be established in the world. By the time you get to Daniel, a great number of things have already taken place in God's program with Israel. The nation is in the 5th cycle of punishment, which we have not yet discussed. So if you're unfamiliar with that terminology, don't let it worry you. We will cover it soon enough. The point here is that the nation has been taken away captive by Babylon, and they are in the times of the Gentiles. Now, the times of the Gentiles refers to the time from the Babylonian captivity to the second advent of Jesus Christ in God's program with Israel. Now, when God temporarily suspends his program with Israel to bring in the dispensation of Gentile grace, you are no longer in the Israel program, and as such, you are no longer in the times of the Gentiles. This period has to do with the fullness of the Gentiles, which is altogether different thing from the times of the Gentiles. In the times of the Gentiles, it is the Gentile nations that have dominance over the nation and land of Israel. At this time in history, things look bleak with regard to Israel becoming what God's plan and purpose call for them to be. But in Daniel chapter 7, the second vision given to the prophet concerning the end times of the nation, God gave some reassurance of Israel's future dominance as the great nation they were promised to be. God also outlined how things will go from that time up until the time of the kingdom, when the nation will fulfill God's purpose with them. Daniel chapter 7, verse 27. And the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. The greatness of the kingdom is given to the people. This is the kind of greatness that God had in mind when he promised Abraham that his seed would be the great nation. It is more than that which concerns population, numbers, or land area. It is that greatness that comes as they administer the kingdom to the rest of the world and hold the position of being God's holy nation and kingdom of priests. Back at the fourth beginning in Genesis chapter 4 through chapter 11, when Satan began to establish his ways in the earth, men began to worship and follow the adversary. Their allegiance was to the prince of this world. Now, we're going to return to Genesis in order to see something that God has Abraham do in connection with the land he has promised him. Bear in mind that even though the adversary has usurped possession of the earth, the land promised to Abraham belongs to God. It was in this same land area that Satan attempted to put together his great nation that would dominate the earth and establish Satan's course for this world. This is what you are reading about in Genesis chapter 10 and 11. To accomplish this, Satan centered his activities in that land that God had chosen for himself, and he did it through Canaan, Ham's son, and Noah's grandson. That is why the inhabitants of the land were called Canaanites. Now, while we don't have time to go into the details of it here, this has bearing on the curse on Canaan from Genesis chapter 9. When God went on the offensive, so to speak, by calling out Abram and making certain promises to him, God staged the contest in the very heart of the land where Satan sought to establish his kingdom. We get more details of the kinds of things Satan was doing in Ezekiel chapter 16. Ezekiel records events and circumstances before the city's name was changed to Jerusalem. But we will leave that for another time. Now, let's look at Genesis chapter 13 and observe what God instructed Abraham to do as he prepared to take back the land from the adversary. Genesis chapter 13. Verse 14. And the Lord said unto Abram, after that Lot was separated from him, lift up now thine eyes, and look from the place where thou art northward, and southward, and eastward, and westward. For all the land which thou seest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed forever. And I will make thy seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can number the dust of the earth, then shall thy seed also be numbered. Arise, walk through the land in the length of it, and in the breadth of it, for I will give it unto thee. Now, in view of God's original intentions, when he created the earth, and Satan's usurped possession of the earth, which interrupted those plans, we now have Abraham performing a gesture that demonstrates God's readiness to repossess this land and put his great nation in it. When God described the boundaries of the land and then instructed Abraham to walk the length and the breadth of it, he was having Adam make a gesture of ownership. When a conqueror succeeded in taking possession of another's land, he would traverse the land area as a gesture that he was now the new possessor. It was a gesture that flaunted this in the face of the previous owner. This is what God had Abraham do when he walked the very land where Satan had established his stronghold. Make a conquering gesture of possession. This is the same gesture that Satan flaunted in the face of the Lord after he usurped possession of the earth from Adam. Job chapter 1 verse 6. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. And the Lord said unto Satan, Whence comest thou? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. Satan was doing more than just taking a tour of the earth. He was displaying the fact that he had taken possession of the earth by walking up and down in it. His answer to God's question was in your face way of boasting that he was the possessor of the earth and God had created for himself. Satan's answer was that he was busy acting in accordance with who he was, the prince of this world. This is the kind of gesture that God is having Abraham perform, as he is meant to take possession of the land for God. And God is having him do it in the very heart of Satan's stronghold. Now, while the people who saw Abraham may not have understood what he was doing, God knew that the one that was meant to see it and understand the gesture would get the message, and that was Satan. God was sending the adversary notice through Abraham. It is out of all this that the things in Sodom and Gomorrah develop to the extent that they do. But again, I only mention this because we are only doing a brief survey type on this work. The progression to have in your mind is that God called Abraham, entered into a covenant with him, and had him exhibit the gesture of possession in the land where Satan had centered his activities. God means to repossess the land for his great nation, and from there, the nation would go out and subdue and have dominion over the rest of the earth, just as Adam was supposed to do in the beginning. This process is now getting underway as Abraham walks up and down in the land. God says the land is his. He is giving it to Abraham, and notice of such is served to Satan. Now things are really going to heat up in the controversy over Zion. There is something else that is very important in Genesis chapter 14 that has to do with God's plan and purpose with Israel. We need to take a moment to examine Melchizedek, or the proper term Melchizedek, and the city of Salem. If you're not familiar with the account of Genesis 14, then you should read through it so that you understand the action. Abraham is going to get involved since these kings have taken his nephew captive. Now, while we cannot deal with every aspect of this, it is worth noting, in view of God's plan of conquest, that Abraham and only 380 men pursue and defeat Chedorlaomer and the kings that were with him. Genesis chapter 14 verse 12. And they took Lot, Abram's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed. And there came one that had escaped, and told Abraham the Hebrew, for he dwelt in the plain of Mamre the Amorite, brother of Eshcol, and the brother of Anar. And these were confederate with Abram. And when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his trained servants, born in his own house, 318, and pursued them into Dan. And he divided himself against them, he and his servants, by night, and smote them, and pursued them to Habah, which is on the left hand of Damascus. And he brought back all the goods, and also brought again his brother Lot, and his goods, and the women also, and the people. Now we are about to get introduced to an important character, Melchizedek. Genesis, look at verse 17 of chapter 14. And the king of Sodom